Um, we are up to chapter 13. We're kind of starting a new section of the Tanya because until now, everything from the beginning until chapter 12, we were leading up to the Benoni, the introduction of the Benoni, which finally happened in chapter 12. Now, honestly, for a lot of people studying Tanya, when you after you read about the Benoni in chapter 12, it could be a little bit of like a down because most of us like to think of ourselves as pretty good people. If you ask someone without studying Tanya, do you consider yourself a Russia? Probably not. Do you consider yourself a righteous person? I mean, I think I'm pretty good. I don't think I'm perfect. I don't think I'm, amazing, but like, pretty good person most of the time. And even if I said there was like an in between, you could be like a Benoni, the in-between person, I still think most people would say, no, I don't even think I'm that. I'm probably more on the scale of righteous. I mean, we like to think of ourselves that way. And then when you read the Tanya, you're like, wait a second, the way the Tanya is describing all this, the Tanya is telling us that the tzaddik is this like perfect, very perfect level that's not, really attainable to most people. Even the Benoni is a pretty perfect level, somebody who's always in control, always making the right decision. That also doesn't sound very attainable. So where does that leave us, and how's that supposed to make us feel? So the next few chapters, beginning now with chapter 13, I think 13 through 15 or 13 through 16, really works on breaking down this Benoni. So we get to know this character better. Like let's understand the details of it, because remember the goal of the Tanya was on the first page of the introduction, it said, my goal is to make it all possible to you, to show you that it's close to you, that doing the right thing is not so difficult. You can live your best life and your best self, and it's not so difficult. So if that's the case, we need a lot of clarification here. So starting with chapter 13, we're really going to start breaking down who exactly is this Benoni. And if those of you who saw the email, and one of the things that's spoken about in this chapter is a concept of truth. Am I being true? Am I being honest? Am I being true to myself if I am sometimes doing the right thing, sometimes not doing the right thing, trying to do it, but not quite feeling it? Am I being truthful? Or maybe in a way it sounds like the tzaddik's truthful, clearly, because they feel like doing the right thing and they do the right thing. So that's a truthful person. In a way, the evil person's true too. They don't feel like it. They don't do it. Great. At least they're being honest. Um, if the Tanya is telling me that I am striving to, despite what I feel, despite what my inclination tells me, I strive to still remain in control and do the right thing, then maybe I'm just not being truthful, and that's not the right way to live. There seems to be a disconnect here. So the Tanya is going to examine this concept of what is truth, what defines truth, and what is the truth in this situation. So that's kind of an overview of what chapter 13 is going to be. Just a quick reminder, we spoke, if I had to say briefly what last chapter told us about the Benoni, we said that we all have the tzaddik, that inspired man, as we called him, is someone who's always inspired, always just wants to connect to God, and just does. A tzaddik is someone who never even desires to do something that's not godly, to such an extent that the perfect tzaddik is even appalled at self-indulgence that's just for the sake of indulgence. Doing something just because it's pleasurable, just because it's fun, not for a godly reason. The tzaddik, like, he can't even understand that. But that's a unique character. That's not the average person. Then you have on the other end of the spectrum, we have the Russia. The Russia is someone who's, what did we call the Russia? We had a good term for him. We said the compromised person. This is someone who has desires and gives into them sometimes. How many times, how often? We said there's the full gamut. There's the Russia who gives in all day, every day, all the time, doesn't even stop to feel remorse. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the Russia who just once in a while, every so often, doesn't do the right thing and then feels bad about it and hopefully doesn't repeat it for quite a while. the Tanya still described it within that category of Russia. So just to clarify, the Tanya is not here to give us labels. You're an evil person, you're a good person. The Tanya is just kind of looking at the absolute terminology to help us understand what's within ourselves. It's not so that I should look in the mirror and say, oh, the Tanya has redefined Russia. In the Tanya's lingo, Russia is not an evil person. Russia is just a person who can't do it right all the time, who struggles. And then the Tanya introduced this character called the Benoni, who on the inside looks just like the Russia. The Benoni has desires and inclinations all the time. The Benoni has a lot of different things he or she wants to do.
A lot of things.
And at the same time, in their actions and their expression, the Benoni is just like the Tzaddik. The Benoni always makes the right choice. The Benoni always exercises control and always holds it together and does the right thing. And some of the tools that Tanya started giving us in last chapter was, how does the Benoni do it? Well, firstly, it said the Benoni really focuses a lot on prayer. The Benoni really digs into prayer. And when the Benoni spends that time every day in real connection and real inspiration, that gives the Benoni this boost that kind of lasts them the entire day. That was one tool. The other tool that we got was the tool of exercising mind control. The Tanya described that in a human, in our nature, our brain has the ability to control our heart. We gave the example of if you had to compare a human to an animal. One of the things that we see about a human is we stand up tall on our two legs. Our head is always above our heart. An animal doesn't have that, right? Those animals walk on all fours. Their head and their heart are of equal height. An animal doesn't have the ability to control their desires, right? When was the last time your dog put itself on a diet? It doesn't happen, right? When was the last time an animal saw something it really wanted and said, oh, wait, actually, I'm going to exercise some self-control right now? It doesn't. It's not a bad thing. It's just natural. That's just how it was created. It wasn't created with the ability to exercise that kind of control. As humans, we have the choice. We could, when we feel like doing something, we could do what the animal does and just lean into our feelings. I feel like it. Let me do it. I'm in the mood. Let me do it. I'm not going to stop myself. Or the Tanya said, we have a natural ability to have our mind rule our heart. It's not something we have to, it's hard work, but it's totally doable. And we know that because when I am, doing something I'm not so comfortable doing and a stranger walks into the room, suddenly I stop. Why would I stop? If I really liked what I was doing, why wouldn't I just keep doing it? Because someone's looking. I'm going to act differently when someone's looking at me, no matter how much I want it to do. If I'm speeding down the highway and I know that I'm going way above the speed limit and it's not the right thing to do, but I feel like it and it feels good and the wind is blowing, right? And the music's on and I'm just in the zone. But then as soon as the highway police shows up and I know I may be getting a ticket, suddenly it doesn't matter what I'm feeling. I am going to slow down because I don't want to get that ticket. So we do have it, and we could all think of examples where we have it innately inside of us, where we can pull out that control switch that says, hang on, heart, I know you really want to do X, but you can't do that right now. And the Benoni uses this tactic a lot. Whenever the Benoni feels the desire to do something, he or she is able to stop and say, wait, I need to think this through. Is this the right thing to do? That's not the only tool that the Benoni uses, because we said you can't, if you lived your life just by self-control, at some point you would snap. It's not really possible to always do the right thing by controlling ourselves to do the right thing. We need to do some internal work to keep ourselves inspired too. Because if I'm not inspired and I'm not passionate about it, at some point it's going to be really hard to just keep controlling myself. Yet at the same time, no amount of inspiration is going to make me do the right thing all the time. So yes, I do need the inspiration, and the Tanya is going to talk about that in later chapters, but I also need to know as a rule of thumb that, hey, I have a brain and my brain can control my heart. I do not need to just do whatever I feel. I always have the ability and the choice to have my mind control my heart. This was our last chapter. Now, chapter 13, we're getting to know this Benoni a little bit better, and we're starting to take a closer look at the Benoni. Some of you might remember at the very, very beginning of the Tanya, in chapter 1, we began with a lot of questions. We're trying to bring up all these terminologies that we know about a tzaddik, a rasha, a Benoni, and we're trying to piece them all together and make sense of them. And really, we just asked a whole series of questions. Chapter 13 starts answering a lot of those questions, and through answering these questions, we start touching upon more about who exactly this Benoni is. So let me pull up chapter 13. Okay, let me just share it for anyone who wants to see the text. Yeah, y'all see my text, right? Yeah, okay, good. One of the things that the Tanya quoted in chapter 13 was that when the sages talk about a tzaddik, a rasha, and a benoni, the sages say, well, a tzaddik is judged by their good inclination. A rasha is judged by their bad inclination. A benoni is judged by both inclinations, which seems to say that a tzaddik does all good, a rasha does all bad, and a benoni is like in between. The Tanya now is going to say, well, actually, if you look closely at the words there, you're going to notice how there's details in there. The sages say the Beinonim are judged by both of their inclinations. It doesn't say they are ruled by both inclinations. It said a Beinoni is judged. And the Tanya compares this to a courtroom. When you have a judge in a courtroom, so in a classic Jewish court case, you have at least 3 judges. Typically, you have, 2 people have a disagreement. Each one of them appoints their rabbi to be one of the judges, and then the 2 judges together choose a third judge who's going to be the third one who's going to help decide who's right. So you're sitting in front of a panel of 3 judges, but ultimately there needs to be a majority in order to win. And so the opinion of one judge doesn't necessarily decide what's going to happen. So in a court case like that, both people tell their story, and then the judge says what he thinks. The next judge says what he thinks. And then ultimately what happens? You have to have the third judge who's like the arbitrator, who basically decides what's the ruling going to be. So the Tanya says, look how interesting. When it says a Benoni is judged by both inclinations, it doesn't say ruled, it's judged. It's like there's a judge sitting inside of me that says, hey, I think you should do X. And then there's the other judge that's inside of me that says, no, actually, that's not the right thing to do. You should do Y. And then a decision has to be made. Who's the arbitrator that comes and helps me win the court case? The Tanya says God himself. When God sees that I am really trying to fight this battle, that I am willing to take my animal soul to court, and I am really trying to say, no, I know I should do the right thing, even though I'm feeling this strong pull to do something that's not the right thing, God will help me. And he's going to help my godly soul overrule and be able to have me do the right thing. So I'll just read inside. Accordingly, we may understand the comment of our sages that Beinonim are judged by both their good and evil inclinations. As it is written, he, the Almighty, stands at the right hand of the poor man to save him from them that judge his soul. Note that our sages did not say he is ruled by both the good inclination and the evil, God forbid, because where the evil nature gains any rule and dominion, albeit momentarily, over the small city, one is deemed wicked at such times. Remember, we said a Benoni is someone who doesn't do anything wrong. So if we said the Benoni is ruled by both, it's not a Benoni. A Benoni is the only king, the only ruler really, is the godly soul. Both voices are loud inside of the Benoni, but the only ruler is ultimately the godly soul. Rather, the evil inclination in the Beinoni is no more than, for example, a magistrate or judge who expresses his opinion on a point of law. Yet, in fact, his decision is not necessarily final, for there's another magistrate or judge who disagrees with him. It then becomes necessary, in order to formulate a binding decision, to arbitrate between the two, and the final verdict will rest with the arbitrator. Similarly, in the battle between the evil inclination and the good, the evil inclination states its opinion in the left part of the heart. Remember, we said the left part is the part that has the rich blood, and that represents the animal soul. From the heart, the desire ascends to the mind for contemplation, meaning we said again, the animal soul operates on emotion. Like I feel like doing something. I have a desire. I'm annoyed. I'm upset, or I'm feeling lustful or whatever it is. It starts with a desire. It then goes up to my mind, and my mind now has the choice. I can either try to justify it, figure out how to achieve this, or I can awaken the godly soul, which is based in the mind. Immediately upon its ascent to the brain, it is challenged by the second judge, the divine soul resting in the brain, which extends into the right part of the heart where the good inclination abides. This is again from a previous chapter. We said the godly soul rests in the brain and the right side of the heart, but the brain is the center point. The final verdict rests with the arbitrator, the Holy One, blessed be he, who comes to the aid of the good inclination. As our sages say, man's evil inclination gathers strength daily, and if the Almighty did not help him, he could not overcome it. Meaning the Tanya here is recognizing that our desire to do earthly, indulgent things is very, very strong desire. It's very difficult to maintain a godly approach in life and to kind of turn away from those urges and desires that I have. But if I really try, then God helps me. And what kind of help does God give? This is interesting. This is, I think we spoke about it last chapter as well, or maybe it was 2 chapters ago. The help that God gives is the light that illuminates the divine soul. The Tanya speaks a lot about the power of light over darkness. Sometimes when you have two things battling, you kind of have to see which one's stronger. In the battle between light and dark, it's not really a battle, because as soon as you turn on the light, the darkness disappears, right? Think of like a little kid who's afraid of monsters under the bed. All you have to do is turn on the light and say, let's look. You see there's no monsters? Turn off the light. And then it's done. We solved it. We didn't have to argue it out. It became very clear that as soon as you turn on the light, the darkness doesn't exist anymore. That, the Tanya explains, is the power of good over evil. And it's the power of the godly soul over the animal soul. Remember, we said the animal soul is not, it's not a bad soul. It's not evil. I don't have evil inside of me. I just have a very natural, self-obsessed, desiring soul that just wants to do what's good for me. As soon as I illuminate the situation and I kind of enlighten my animal soul and enlighten myself, and I realize what the right thing is, I can turn my animal soul around too. I don't have to battle it. It's not like this, it's not like this monster that's inside me. I just need to really allow my intellect to take the lead and not my heart. Because in my mind, I know what's right. So even when my heart feels something, as soon as I take some time and I contemplate it and I am able to understand that this is not the right thing to do, I'm able to then overpower the negative desire that I had. And that's, the Tanya says, that's the way God helps. He helps the goodness overcome the evil inside of me, or the evil desire inside me, because he gives that light that just illuminates the darkness. The help that God grants him is the glow of divine light that illuminates his divine soul, that it may gain superiority and mastery over the folly of the fool and the evil inclination, paralleling the superiority of light over darkness as stated above. I wanted to share 2 stories. One story is a parable that's told about a king who had 3 sons, and the king's trying to decide which of his 3 sons should become the next king. So he wanted to test their wisdom. So he told his three sons he is having a contest. He's giving each of them a room. And the contest is you each have to choose a medium to fill your room up with. Whoever's room is the most full is the winner. Make your room as full as it could possibly be. So and they're going to have exactly 24 hours to do this. But you can prepare for it, meaning it's going to be on this and this day. I'm letting you know a week or 2 weeks in advance. That is the day that you're going to get your room and you're going to have to fill it up. So the first son thinks and thinks and he says, I know I'm going to fill it up with bricks. Bricks they're pretty small. They they're pretty easy to stack. And if I fill up a room with bricks, I basically can fill up all of it. So he starts, gathering bricks and preparing them. The second son has a different idea. He says, I actually am going to, bricks are too heavy. I don't want to deal with bricks. I'm going to fill my room up with feathers. Feathers, like you can squish them and squish them and squish them, and like they'll fill up every nook and cranny. I'm going to fill up the room with feathers. So he starts, ordering feathers. All the Amazon boxes full of feathers start coming, and he's getting ready to fill up his room with feathers. The third son is just, sitting there and smoking cigars. And the brothers look at him and they're like, what are you planning to do? He's like, don't worry, I have it figured out. Okay. They get closer to the day. It's like the day before, and this one brother has tons and tons of bricks piled up. The next one has tons of feathers, and the other one is just, sitting there twiddling his thumbs. So they say to him, I mean, come on, what are you planning to do? You need to fill up a whole entire room. You only have 24 hours to do it. He says, don't worry, I got this. Anyway, 24 hours begins and the 24 hours ends, and the king comes at the end of the 24 hours to see who's the winner. He walks into the first room. The room was pretty full with bricks, but it turns out that the bricks were heavier than the son anticipated. And after a while, it got really heavy to carry so many bricks. So he filled up, like 2/3 of the room with bricks, but he couldn't do it all the way. So the king looks around. He's like, you did a pretty good job. I still see a lot of space that could have been filled. And even between the bricks, you didn't fully press them against each other. There's still some spaces and some cracks. You get an A for effort. He goes to the second son, the room of feathers. And this son, he opens the door and the feathers come flying out at him. But as the king pushes himself into the room, he's able to squeeze his way in. He's like, look, you filled it up with feathers, but if I can squeeze myself into this room, that means there's still space in here. There's still, space in the room that doesn't have feathers that can contain me. So again, nice job. He goes to the third room, and the son opens the door, and it's dark. It's very dark. And the father says, son, what did you do? What are you filling your room with? And he says, well, I'm going to show you. He strikes a match and he holds up the match. And he says, Dad, I'm filling the room up with light. Show me one spot in this room that's not currently full of light. The room was full of light. And the story is used to demonstrate the power of light. Light is so powerful that you don't have to fill a place with light. You don't have to battle the darkness. As soon as you introduce light, the darkness disappears. You suddenly just have light. So that was one story. The other story is a contemporary story about a guy named Dr. Velvel Green. He was a NASA scientist in the 60s who lived in Minnesota. He's very well known. He's also very well. There's a very interesting. I don't know. I think it's kind of like an autobiography / biography. I think he started writing it, and then after he passed away, his sons, kind of added to it. This guy was a very famous scientist in Minnesota. He's a Jewish guy who really didn't believe anything and really was not interested in being connected to the Jewish community. And he has a very interesting story about how he met the famous Rabbi Moshe Feller, who was the Chabad emissary to Minnesota, and the interesting interactions that they had. Ultimately, Dr. Green himself decided to live a more observant life. And he had very interesting, for those who are into the whole science and Judaism thing, he had a lot of very interesting correspondence with the Lubavitch Rebbe about trying to reconcile all of his big questions about science versus Torah. And some of the most fascinating responses that the Rebbe wrote on this topic were in the correspondence with Dr. Green. Anyway, in his biography, he tells that, when he was still, he had become really good friends with Rabbi Feller, and he was slowly taking on some Jewish observance, but, one step at a time. One day, Rabbi Feller told him, Dr. Green, it's time for you to start keeping kosher. He's like, what are you talking about? That's crazy. I can't do that. It's way too hard. He's like, well, look, you travel a lot because he was always going to conferences all around the US. He's like, I want that when you take your next trip, order a kosher meal. This was in the 60s. They were still offering meals on, domestic flights. And he's like, all you have to do is, call in and order a kosher meal. And he's like, and anyway, I already know how it works. You're going to order a kosher meal. You're going to get onto the plane. They're not actually going to have the kosher meal. And then you're going to feel what I feel like every time I fly. But regardless, at least commit that for your travel, you're going to eat kosher. So Dr. Green agrees. And he calls the airline and they tell him they're saving a kosher meal for him. And he sits down on the plane. He's going to a particularly busy conference. He had a really full day, and they come out with the meals, and he must be traveling like business class or first class, whatever it was. They're serving some delicious looking food. And of course, he says, I requested a kosher meal. So, well, let me check that for you in the front, which is code for we actually don't have it. And turns out they didn't have the meal for him. So I don't know, it wasn't on the list. We didn't know. And actually, he said I think he writes that because he was such a frequent traveler on this route that he was taking, some of the flight attendants knew him well. And like this flight attendant turned to him and she's like, Dr. Green, like you never order kosher meals. Like, what's with the kosher meal? And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm a Jew. Jews should only eat kosher. He just gave her the whole spiel about kosher. Anyway, he's starving. He gets off the plane. And apparently also what was common then is I think he landed, I think it was maybe the Chicago airport, where he landed, and on the way when you get off the plane, there were a whole bunch of hot dog stands. And so he's starving, and he's used to always, if he's hungry on the way, he would always stop at one of the hot dog stands and, get himself something to eat. And this time he's just rushing past the hot dog stands. He's like, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. I'm so hungry, but I told him I'm going to keep kosher for this trip. Anyway, he rushes to the first payphone and he calls up Rabbi Feller and he says, Rabbi Feller, I just need you to know what just happened. I ordered the kosher meal. They didn't have it. I just rushed past all the hot dog stands, and here I am, and I'm still starving. Rabbi Feller says, as soon as you come back to town, I want you to come to my office. I want to talk to you. And he describes that when he went to meet Rabbi Feller, and it was the same day or the next day, he comes to his office and Rabbi Feller says, Dr. Green, here's what I need you to know. Life is always going to be a whole bunch of hot dog stands. And you need to live your life rushing past the hot dog stands. That's just how you have to look at it. You want to, work on being a dedicated Jew, the world is always going to be full of hot dog stands. You're never going to get rid of them. And I thought this was interesting when we discuss what the Benoni is. It's not like the Benoni reached a place where they don't desire things anymore. The Benoni still very much has a lot of desires, and maybe they were able to work on themselves in certain areas that they're desiring certain things less. But the desires never go away. You might swap desire A for desire B for desire C. But at the end of the day, what the Benoni does is they're rushing past the hot dog stands. They recognize what it is that they want. They recognize what is the thing that God wants me to do. And with the mind controlling the heart, they rush past it. And it's interesting because this is where the Tanya really, it's a very new approach. Anyone who studied books of Musar before the Tanya was written, the books of Musar talk about, becoming the ideal person, doing the right thing. And a big struggle that a lot of people had was, I'm studying, I'm working on myself so much. And then I wake up, 10 years later, and I still smell the hot dogs in the hot dog stand, and I still want them. So was all that work for nothing? Like, Is that, am I not actually succeeding and becoming a better person? I'm still desiring those same old things that I always wanted? And the Tanya says, you have it all wrong. The goal was not to eliminate your desires. The goal of the average person is to face your desires every day and to walk past them. And yes, you have to work on inspiring yourself, and there's a lot of tools that you can lean into to help you with this. But our goal is not to become a person that has it easy to do the right thing. And as you study more and more Tanya, towards the end, the Tanya actually focuses on not just, this is actually not second best. Don't think like, oh, well, I guess if I could have been a tzaddik, then I could have just reached that place where it's all good. The Tanya actually describes that this is the ultimate purpose of creation. When we face our battles every day, when we face those things that we desire and we don't do them, we are actually fulfilling the purpose of creation. The reason that God put people in this world is so that there should be people who face off with that which opposes God and win the battle. But that's not chapter 13. That's already a later chapter. Chapter 13 is still talking about this Benoni, this person we're trying to become. And even if we're, instead of thinking like, how can I be a Benoni? I can't always do the right thing, right? We said, let's talk about Benoni moments. Like, let's stop thinking of it as a total thing, but let me try to be that person. The next time I have a challenge, let me try to approach it like a Benoni. Let's see if I can make that happen. Yes, Arlene.
You said that oftentimes the desires that come from your animal soul are not overtly evil or bad. I just wonder sometimes, is it difficult to recognize with the desires that are the ones that need to be contemplated in your mind? It almost sounds like you're planning on do something, it's wrong, so there'll be a debate going on between your left heart and your right heart and whatever. But I just wonder if sometimes it's difficult to recognize what is something that needs to be debated if they're so subtle.
That's a good question. So I'm going to say two things. Firstly, because we know that the animal soul is mainly emotional, it always tries to rush us into things. Because if I'm not going to rush into it, if I'm going to take some time and I'm going to start thinking about it, then ultimately I'm actually going to start debating, is this the right thing to do? So when I want to do something and I have a sense of urgency in doing it, that might be a hint that this is not necessarily coming from the godly soul. That's if I feel an urgent need to do something right now, let me tell myself, let me wait 10 minutes. And in those 10 minutes, I have the opportunity to actually start thinking about it and evaluating, is this the right thing to do? So that's one thing that I think is very helpful. The other thing is sometimes you're right. Sometimes it's hard to know. Like if I want it, I'm faced with a choice between two things, and they both seem like very good things to do. And it's hard for me to be able to tell if the desire for doing each of those things is coming really from a godly place because I want to do the right thing, or is it one of those things where I want to do it because this is really about me? I just want to feel better about myself. We said Psychology Today recognizes that so much of what people do is they're doing good, but they're doing it for themselves. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not necessarily godly. If I'm choosing between two things and I'm trying to recognize which of these is which one would God want me to do? Sometimes, if I'm having a hard time recognizing it, that's what a spiritual mentor is for. Being able to turn to someone who knows me well and could be a little more objective and say, hey, this is my dilemma. Which one do you think is really what I should be doing? Which one do you think is just my animal soul talking? Often a good friend, good spiritual mentor would be able to help you recognize what we ourselves can't recognize because we're in the situation. Did that answer your question?
Thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, I want to talk about the Tanya is going to answer. We're answering a few questions that came up in chapter 1. So the first question we answered was, what does it mean that both the good inclination, the bad inclination are judging? We answered that piece. The next question that Tanya wants to answer is, what's with that oath? Remember we said that before a person's born, they need to take an oath that you're going to be, it says, be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha. And even if the whole world tells you that you're a tzaddik, in your own mind, you should think of yourself as a rasha. And the Tanya asks about that. Like, wait a second. If everyone tells me that I'm good and I think of myself as bad, I'm going to feel really awful about myself. That's, a sure road to depression, which is one of the tools of the evil inclination. That's not going to get me to do the right thing. So is that what I'm supposed to be doing? And if a person says, well, I'm going to think of myself as a rasha, but I'm not going to let myself feel bad about it. Tanya says, that's also not a good thing. That's just going to make me, what's the word? An apathetic person. So like, all right, I'm not a great person and I don't care about it either. So the Tanya here comes to respond to that. Tanya says, notice again, it's the details are in the words. It says, the Talmud there says, Heye be'enecha kirasha. Be in your own eyes kirasha, as a rasha. It doesn't say think of yourself that you are a rasha. Think of yourself that you are like a rasha. And that is the idea of the Tanya is telling us, no matter what level of greatness you reach, no matter how much the world, the people around you tell you you're amazing, you're awesome, you're doing great, don't trust yourself too much. Remind yourself that on the inside, even if I have achieved the status of Benoni, right? On the inside, I know that I'm still like, my insides look just like the Russia's inside. I still have desires to do the wrong thing. Don't be so certain that, oh, I've achieved this great space now, I could just sit back and I don't have to worry. I still have to worry. No matter what level I achieved, I always have to keep working hard to make sure that I don't slip back into my old ways. I think a classic example that we brought up in the past is an example of someone who's in recovery. Somebody who's, was an addict for a bunch of years in their life, and then they're in recovery and they're clean for 30 years. If you ask them, they're still going to say, I'm an addict in recovery. I've been in recovery for 30 years. I've been clean for 30 years. Think about it. What do you mean 30 years? Like, that's it. Like, you don't have that status anymore. You're no longer an addict if you're already clean for 30 years. They say, no, I still have to think of myself as an addict because if not, what's going to happen? I know that one misstep, I can slip right back into my old ways. So similarly, the Tanya says, the idea is not to think to myself as a bad person. It's not trying to pull me down. It's trying to remind me that if I'm going to be really honest with myself, I need to always remember, no matter how well I'm doing, I need to know that I still have my animal soul inside me. And if I'm not careful, it's very easy to slip back into doing not the right thing. So that was the second answer that we're answering here from chapter 1. Another thing that chapter 1 asked, let me just see. Okay, I was gonna describe something else. So another thing we said in chapter 1, we spoke about this man named Rabbah. We said Rabbah was a great sage who was known to be an amazing person, like a super leader of the Jewish people. And once there was a discussion in the study hall and they were discussing the different levels that people can achieve, and Rabbah said about himself, you want an example of a Benoni? I'm an example of a Benoni. I'm an example of the in-between level. And his counterpart, Abaye, said to him, Rabbah, if you're a Benoni, you're not leaving life for anyone else. In other words, if we all know you're such a great person and you're just a Benoni, what does that make everyone else here? And the Tanya brought this up as a question in chapter 1, saying, wait a second. Rabbah, we may say he was humble, but he clearly wasn't lying, right? Humility is not to lie. Humility is to maybe to downplay things, not to boast about things. But if Rabbah truly believed that he was a tzaddik, He wouldn't lie and say, I'm only a Benoni. If Rabbah said, I am an example of a Benoni, I'm an example of that in-between level, it must be that the Benoni is similar enough to a tzaddik that Rabbah could have actually made the mistake to think that he's a Benoni. So in chapter 13, we clarify that a bit more. Chapter 13, we say, so we already established that a Benoni is not someone who's half the time good, half the time bad. It's just someone whose inside is, he's got the half and half, but externally they're always in control. But chapter 13 is going to add that someone who is a Benoni does have tzaddik moments and experiences that they may actually not be sure, am I a tzaddik or a Benoni at this time? What does that mean? When a Benoni is very inspired, we all go through times that we're so inspired, right? Think of like that moment that you're in shul on Yom Kippur or at the end of Yom Kippur and you're like, that's it. I'm like really going to do it right this year. And then we come home and, the inspiration dies down a little bit, or a little bit a lot. Or we listen to a lecture, or we attend a class, or we sit at some, musical event, and we're so, so, so inspired. At that moment, if anyone were to come and try to convince me to do something that God doesn't like, I would say no, like, not now. Like, let's not talk about this now. The next day or the next week, it's a different story. I may very well be interested in doing something else because that kind of external inspiration, it doesn't last. The Benoni, when the Benoni is engaged in an inspiring moment, and the example that the Tanya gives is prayer, when the Benoni really knows how to pray well, the Benoni is not, when the Benoni gets themselves into that right mindset for prayer, they're not easily distracted. So when the Benoni is praying, they're so on fire that the negative inclination inside them is basically sleeping. They will not experience any desires for anything that's not holy during the time that they're praying or during the time that they're inspired. So a Benoni that prays for a long time, or a Benoni that spends a lot of time in prayer and Torah study, could start mistaking and saying, hey, I haven't had the desire to do X, Y, and Z for a long time. Maybe I've graduated. Maybe I've reached the level of tzaddik. I don't have to worry about, being a Benoni of, having to battle this out all the time. And the Tanya says, no, you need to know that even a Benoni can have such moments, but the person knows they're a Benoni because as soon as you step out of the study hall, as soon as you close the prayer book, as soon as you left the synagogue, your desires are right back to where they were. So being that this is the case, firstly, we could answer why Rabbah could have made that mistake. Rabbah was someone that studied Torah all day and night. It says about Rabbah that the angel of death was not able to take his life away because someone's life cannot be taken when they are actively engaged in Torah study. Like while he's saying words of Torah, his life can't be taken away. So the angel of death came to end Rabbah's life, and Rabbah's mouth would not stop for a moment from saying words of Torah that the angel of death had no control over him. So you could say, Rabbah? Why would he think he's a Benoni? So being that he was a humble person, Rabbah always assumed that the reason he didn't have any negative inclinations is because he was engaged in Torah study. He's like, I may be just a Benoni who's actively very inspired all the time, but as soon as I close my book, I don't know what desires are going to come to me. Meaning that it wasn't so far-fetched for Rabbah to think, maybe I'm a Benoni. But the point of this is not so much for the technicality of answering the question, to bring it back to us, it's to tell us that it is possible, even for the Benoni, to have moments where they can achieve tremendous inspiration like that. And it's also possible for someone who's not a Benoni to have moments in which they are having Benoni moments. It's not all or nothing. It's not either or. It's understanding what the levels are and where I'm trying to get to, and then working on myself one day at a time, 1 hour at a time to experience life as that character. Yes, Sarah.
Okay, so just a point to clarify, I'm hearing you using words like negative inclination. And then I'll hear you say my words, you can be a tzaddik in your own department, department A, B, C, these various things. Are you saying it's only of negative commandments, but not positive commandments? Or is it both?
Um, it says that a person who, one of the quotes in chapter 1 said that a person who has the opportunity to fulfill a positive mitzvah and doesn't, according to, I believe it's quoting from the Talmud, at that moment, that person's also not fulfilling their obligation. So the Talmud also calls them a rasha in that moment. So a Beinoni is someone who, sorry, a tzaddik, if we're going to say someone who's always doing the right thing, that means that every single moment they are doing what God would have wanted them to do at that moment. So if it's a moment that they have an opportunity to do a positive mitzvah, they're doing a positive mitzvah. They're definitely staying away from negative commandments. Does that make sense?
I mean, you could argue you could do more than one thing at a time. How do you prioritize?
Okay, that's a good question. I mean, Code of Jewish Law does tell us pretty clearly how to prioritize when it comes to Torah mitzvah. It says that, when someone is praying and a mitzvah comes up, should they keep praying or should they do the mitzvah? So there's a series of laws. Depends what part of prayer I'm in. Depends if this mitzvah could only be fulfilled by me or there's someone else who can fulfill this mitzvah too. If I am facing two different mitzvot and I'm trying to decide which one I should engage in, again, there is a hierarchy in the Code of Jewish Law. A mitzvah that I can do that no one else can do always takes precedence. A mitzvah that directly, let's say when it comes to charity, if I'm trying to choose two charities, which one to give to. So it says that our family comes first, your own city comes first. So if I have an opportunity to give money to a local charity or to a charity in, somewhere in Africa, I choose my local charity. If I have an opportunity to help someone in my family who needs the charity versus someone who's not in my family, again, and family also extends to the Jewish nation. So if I'm choosing between a Jewish charity and a non-Jewish charity, if all else is equal, then the Jewish charity is my own family. I need to help my people first. So there are a series of laws about choosing and prioritizing mitzvahs one over the other.
Hmm.
And at
And
the
it sounds
same
like
time,
the
sorry.
negative inclination part of it, is that also a positive inclination? Does it work the other way around is what I'm saying?
Yeah, it does, because my godly soul wants me to do the right thing. My animal soul wants me to do what's good for me, which means avoiding positive commandments that get in the way of me enjoying life.
So do you think that also would lead to like depressive symptoms and like the feeling of guilt if those opportunities are missed? Is just as the same?
I think that if you know that you're doing the right thing, then you're not going to have those feelings of guilt. Those feelings of guilt are, and this we know, I think in chapter 26 in Tanya, it talks about that a lot of times sadness and feelings of guilt are actually the work of the animal soul. If my animal soul knows that it can't get me to do the wrong thing because I'm always, on the ball, it's got a lot of tricks up its sleeve. It's going to make me feel really bad for missing the opportunity to do something. And we know that negativity begets negativity. I feel bad about myself, then I feel worse about myself, and then I say, what the heck? I ate one donut, let me eat the whole box, right? I already skipped this one time. I may as well skip it every time. I may as well not do it. Who do I think I am anyway to try to do so many mitzvahs? So, we have to be very careful with that guilt and negativity. Very often, it's really just a tool to keep us away from doing the right thing.
Thank you.
Sure. I want to get to just that last point about truth in this chapter. So this is, I'm going to we'll read a little bit inside and then we're going to explain it because I find it's a very fascinating concept of truth. Firstly, for those of you who are familiar with the Hebrew word emet, emet is spelled aleph mem taf. Emet meaning truth. The three letters that make up the word truth, aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The last letter of emet taf is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and the mem is the central letter of the Hebrew alphabet, meaning that truth is beginning, middle, and end, symbolizing that truth is something that needs to be the same. It's something that doesn't change. Truth, and there's a phrase that's quoted here, a pasuk from, I believe it's from Psalms, Sfat emet tikon la'ad. Truth will last forever. Something that's true is always going to be true. If something's always changing, then it can't be truth. There's another, this is, just a side note for those who are familiar. I don't have a visual of it here, but those who are familiar with the way the Hebrew letters are written in the Torah scroll. So if you, I may have a slide of it. I feel like I once prepared a slide of it. Let me see. If you take the 3 letters that make up emet and the 3 letters that make up sheker, which is falsehood or not true. Let me see if I have a slide. I vaguely recall putting this together. Sorry, one second. Oh, here. Look at that. Hold on. I'm going to share this. If you take, here, the bottom one here, the bottom here is emet, aleph, mem, taf. Notice that the letters, like if I made these letters out of clay and I placed them, they would all stand pretty nicely. They all have these like flat bottoms that they could just stand. If I take the 3 letters that make up untruth, a lie, or sheker, shin kuf resh, they're very unstable letters. Like if I had to place each of these letters on the table, they wouldn't stand. And that symbolizes, it's fascinating how within the Hebrew alphabet, there's so much depth and so much symbolism, but that symbolizes the idea that truth lasts, it stands, it's everlasting. You can't knock it off its feet. But something that's not true is going to be shaky, and it's not going to last. It's not going to stay the same forever. Oh, and here I have with the letters of the alphabet, just to show again, emet, we have the aleph, the mem, and the taf that spell truth, emet. Now, it's interesting also, the Tanya brings this pasuk here, Sfat emet ikon la'ad sheker en lo reglaim. No, this is not the pasuk. The pasuk, we'll see it inside. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. Let's look back in the Tanya to see where it's talking about the truth. Why is it talking about truth? It's going to say, okay, so if I say a Benoni reaches Benoni status, but sometimes they have tzaddik-like moments because they're able to be so inspired that their evil inclination is just gone, sleeping. But then they leave the synagogue or they close the prayer book and now their evil inclination is awake again. So are they being true to themselves? Like, is that true? Or maybe that's just totally dishonest. Like one day you're like this, one day you're like that. 1 minute you're doing the right thing, 1 minute you're not doing the right thing. Maybe that's not real truth. So this is where I want to look at the end of this chapter. I just want to see exactly where it is. Okay. Okay, so this is very interesting. So now this aforementioned love attained by the Beinonim at the time of prayer by virtue of the temporary preponderance of the divine soul over the animal soul. So someone who is a Beinoni and they're in prayer, they're fully engrossed in prayer, and they are, passionate and they're inspired and they're feeling a tremendous love for God. And at this moment, they don't even have the desire to do anything negative. This love that they have, when compared to the standard of the tzaddikim, who serve God in perfect truth, it's not called true service, since it passes and disappears after prayer. So if you wanted to compare what the Beinoni is feeling to what the tzaddik is feeling, you're right. You would say that isn't really true, because a tzaddik is feeling the positivity all the time, doesn't have any of that, of the animalistic feelings. A Beinoni feels it at the time of prayer and then walks away and doesn't feel it anymore. So if I had to compare what the Beinoni is feeling to what the tzaddik is feeling, compared to the tzaddik, it isn't true. Whereas it is written, the language of truth shall be established forever, but the tongue of falsehood is only momentary. This is from Tehillim. Sfat emet ikon la'ad, v'adargia lashon shaker. Right? Truth has to be forever. Truth has to be eternal. If something is true, it's always true. If something is not true, then, you can't, then it won't be the same all the time. So based on this, it seems like the tzaddik epitomizes truth because they always feel it, they always do it. The Benoni, maybe it's not real truth because it's not always the same. How do you say that the Benoni is being their true self if they seem kind of shaky in that way? Nevertheless, in relation to the rank of the Benoni, the level of love, this level of love is regarded as a truly perfect service in terms of their level of truth. And each man, relative to his standing in the category of Benonim, their love too, which they possess only during prayer, I term the language of truth, shall be established forever, since their divine soul has the power to reawaken this love constantly whenever it gathers strength during prayer, day after day. So here's what's interesting. I know in modern lingo, people like to say that everyone has their own truth. There's no ultimate truth. There's no objective truth. I have my truth. You have your truth. Everyone has their own truth and everyone lives by their own truth. That's not what the Tanya is saying at all. That's completely opposite of what the Torah stands for. We say the Torah is true. Torah is truth. God is truth. And that's why it's never changing. But that being said, the Tanya is telling us that just because I can't experience truth all the time, it doesn't mean that when I experience it, it isn't true. Meaning, a tzaddik is always in tune with his or her truth. Because the tzaddik has the godly soul revealed, the animal soul is, gotten rid of. And so the tzaddik always feels the positivity and the holiness and the godliness and always acts upon it. The Benoni doesn't. When the Benoni is inspired, the Benoni is only feeling inspiration and positivity. And then when the Benoni walks away from the synagogue, from the prayer book, from the inspiring moment, they're not feeling it. It doesn't mean it's not true. It just means that right now the Benoni is not tapped into their truth. And how do I know this? Because I know that at any given moment, that same Benoni has the ability to reawaken those feelings. Meaning I had a moment of tremendous inspiration. It was my truth. Then I walked away from it. I'm not feeling it anymore. So, okay, I'm a hypocrite. It's not true to me. Tanya says, no, no, no. It's still my truth. I am now walking away from the truth. So I'm not feeling it right now. But you know how I know it's true? Because I know that if I were to walk back into the synagogue now or reopen that prayer book or go back to that lecture or go back to that experience, I'm going to feel it again. The example that's given for truth, for those who are familiar with the tabernacle, the walls around the tabernacle, the krashim, they were like these beams. It says that there was a pole, the middle pole that went in through all the beams in all the walls of the tabernacle. Meaning, think of like a room and think that there is a pole that is in the center of all four walls and kind of bends at every corner. It's a separate discussion of how that was possible. It was a miraculous concept that in the tabernacle, in the Mishkan, they had walls that had, how do you get one beam to kind of turn all the corners and be at the center of all the walls? But that was called the Bria Chatichon. That represented truth. It represented the concept of truth, the concept of something that always is always true, always there, never changes. It's always at the center of every wall. What the Tanya is telling us is, let's demonstrate this with a story. There's a story of a chassid. I think it was a chassid of the fifth Chabad Rebbe. I'm not sure. That he grew up in a family of chassidim, and he always, came to visit the Rebbe and get blessings for the Rebbe. And at some point, he went into business, and for his business trips, he had to dress, like a modern businessman. He felt that was going to be better for his business. So whenever he would go on a business trip, he would dress like a businessman. And then when he came back to the Rebbe's court, he would put on his, Hasidic garb and come to see the Rebbe that way. And as his business grew and he was involved in business more and more, he said, who am I fooling? Like, the Rebbe knows what I do for a living. He knows who I am. Like, why am I just pretending and putting on this Hasidic garb every time I come? Next time I visit the Rebbe, I'm going in my regular business clothes. And so that's what he did. He came to visit the Rebbe with his, whatever suit, tie, however he used to dress for business. And the Rebbe looked at him and said, I don't know if he even said anything, but he said like knew what's going on. He said, Rebbe, I decided I'm not going to be a hypocrite anymore. I'm going to be my true self. I'm not gonna pretend. So the Rebbe said, I thought until now that when you were here, this was your true self, and every time you went out on business, you were dressing up for the outside world. Meaning this guy thought, he would decided that he's now identifying with his businessman self. So why should he dress up for the Rebbe? And the Rebbe said, no, this is your true self. This is where you belong. When you dress this way, you're being true to yourself. And then you have to go on a business trip. So, you dress however you need to dress. The idea is, and I know we spoke about this a few times about, sometimes when we feel like a hypocrite, like, why should I, go out of my way to eat kosher today if I know I'm definitely not eating kosher tomorrow? My truth is always my truth, and the truth of a Jewish person is always the identity of their godly soul. So when I am eating kosher, when I am doing the godly thing, I am being true to myself. Maybe tomorrow I'm going to do something where I'm not going to be in touch with my true self. That doesn't change the fact that this is still my true self. I always have, the way I know it's true is I know I always have the opportunity to come back to it. Now, we said it's not this level is not true for the tzaddik, because if the tzaddik were to start dipping in and out, that's not true. The tzaddik's able to do more. But for someone who's a Beinoni, for someone who's holding at that level where they're working on it every moment, one moment at a time, every time they tap into the moment, they're connecting with truth. So while truth doesn't change from one person to the next, we access truth differently. Some of us access it more frequently, some of us access it less frequently, but it doesn't change the fact that the truth is true and is everlasting. And one thing interesting to note, the phrase that the Tanya quotes, the pasuk from Tehillim that speaks about truth, is Sfat emet ikon la'ad. Sfat emet ikon la'ad, and what was the end of it? Oh, I can't remember. Ve'ad argia lashon shaker. It starts with a shin and ends with a resh. Some of you might know there is a custom in the daily prayers when we say the Shemona Esrei. So at the end of Shemona Esrei, many have the custom to recite right before you end the Amidah prayer, to recite a phrase from the Torah, a verse from the Torah that corresponds to your name. How do you find a verse that corresponds to your name? A verse you look at your Hebrew name. Your Hebrew name has a first letter and a last letter. When you find a verse in the Torah that has the same first letter as your Hebrew name and the same last letter as your Hebrew name, that's a verse that corresponds directly to your Hebrew name. So some of the modern prayer books actually have at the end like lists of verses, like common Hebrew names and verses, if you're looking for a verse that connects with your Hebrew name. But the author of the Tanya, his name was Shneor, right? Rabbi Shneor Zalman. This verse about truth begins with a shin and ends with a resh. That was his verse that corresponded to his name. And when he quotes this verse, the commentaries on Tanya say, he was saying, like, trust me, I focus on truth. Truth is very important to me. I say this phrase 3 times a day. Every time I pray the Amidah prayer 3 times a day, I say this phrase. And I want to make an emphasis and show you what truth is, and show you that you have the ability to tap into truth regardless of where you are, regardless of what you're doing. Don't think that your actions are changing your truth. Your actions are how you're acting. Your truth will always stay, and then you have the ability to always connect to your truth and tap into your truth. That pretty much brings us to the end of chapter 13. For those who are curious, I want to read it inside. I definitely recommend that. If you go back and read through the text, I think that based on our discussion today, you'll probably understand it better. But again, we're still getting to know this Beinoni, but we're getting to know different things about him. I think the main things we got to know today are, number one, that the Beinoni has moments of tremendous inspiration, and each of us can have different moments of greater inspiration. If we're not at the Beinoni level, that we could have moments where we act like a Beinoni, where we try to be a Beinoni. Someone who's a Beinoni could have moments where they have like tzaddik-like moments. And then the discussion of truth is I think a very powerful one to reflect on realizing that truth is truth, and we don't have different truths, but we connect to we may connect to the truth at different levels in different ways, but ultimately it's the same truth. Thoughts, questions, comments? I'm here. Anyone who has to sign off, I understand. I know we passed our 9 o'clock mark. All right. Have a good night. Good to see you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Leila Tov.